Estás escuchando un audio del Grupo de Investigación Tiempha. Tiempha es un espacio de pensamiento, creación e investigación transdisciplinar que explora las relaciones entre arte, tiempo y ecologías contemporáneas. Este contenido forma parte de nuestras actividades académicas y de divulgación disponibles en nuestra web.
Amazing. No, thank you so much. I'm so excited. I'm so sad that I'm not there in person. It would be so fun. But yeah, since this morning, I was glued to my screen to listen to the other talks. And it was very interesting. So yeah, thank you to my compañeras también. And yeah, we have a nice amount of time together now, but there's a lot of things that I want to say. So I'm gonna throw a lot of information onto you, and then hopefully we can discuss a little bit more in the Q&A after. But yeah, thank you so much for this great invitation. I actually I'm trained as a curator, so I came to the world of fungi more from the arts, and particularly because of my interest in systems and alliances and networks. So since 2008, I was working for an organization called Trans Artists, which is the international database for artist residencies, and became very interested in how systems are ways to redistribute knowledge and information, and to allow for more people to access certain opportunities. So my interest is really system design, I would say. Working with so many residencies, though, I realized that there was a lot of interest, kind of a growing interest, in what happens at the intersection of art and ecology, particularly because this world of residencies, I mean, we're talking like 2008, 2009, 2010, the whole debate about ecology and sustainability was only kind of picking up at the time. And so a big part of the conversation around sustainability and residencies was, of course, also related to our carbon footprint, to flying, and our energy consumption. So that's kind of the path that I walked, coming from residencies to climate, to sustainability, and later mycology. And then suddenly I had enough of the art world. I got very frustrated by the market, by hierarchical systems, and quit my job and started working on a shiitake farm in Brazil, cultivating mushrooms. And as I was working on the farm, breathing the spores every day and eating mushrooms every day, I felt like something was changing inside of me. And I kind of maybe thought also like I was going crazy a little bit, and thought the best way to find out what's happening is to speak with other people who are working so closely with mushrooms. And that's kind of the starting point for the book that Helen so beautifully translated, and that's been mentioned before. It's really based on conversation with many people working closely with mushrooms, either as cultivators and farmers, or as their material, so artists, or well, in many different ways. And doing all these interviews kind of led to the book, and then later on also led to a set of cards, as I realized that also not everyone learns just by reading, or we have also different ways of understanding the world, and not just it's not just always books. So different ways of also engaging with knowledge. What I want to do today is share a kind of almost diary style, some of my first notes from the book. So that was when I was on the shiitake farm, but then also that kind of demonstrates, I think, how the book is really just one node in a much bigger network of ways of working and ways of collaborating and ways of being that really I've been practicing for, well, I don't know, 15 years or so. So I love lists. I make lists all the time. This was the first list that I made whilst I was on the farm, trying to understand how the mushrooms kind of were impacting my life. I put the slides in Spanish to compensate that I'm speaking in English with you today. I won't read all of them. I'll just give you a sec to have a look at them. We can pick out one or two later if we want to discuss them more closely. But basically, this list of 20 led to a list of 12 teachings that I will quickly pass through. So, cómo volverse fúngico, cómo revisar nuestra memoria colectiva, cómo organizarse como un micelio. This has been a very important one in my life. Cómo repensar la podredumbre y la descomposición. Cómo comprender la cercanía de la toxicidad. Cómo conformar nuevos mundos con nuestra imaginación. Cómo escapar de la categorización. ¿Qué nos enseñan los hongos sobre los modelos de colaboración multiespecie? Cómo desplazarse a través de distintas nociones de tiempo. Cómo lidiar con la inseguridad. Cómo puede el lenguaje guiarnos hacia el paradigma fúngico. Y cómo poner en práctica estas enseñanzas en nuestras vidas. So this is the one that I want to talk about today. No, how do we actually implement these teachings into our lives, into our ways of working? I'm not so much going to share a lot of projects, but more hopefully ways that are also useful for anyone in working on projects and in collaborations. That you can apply to your life. So the first question in order to do that was this idea of emulating the mycelium. No, so it's been mentioned already a few times today in the different talks, the mycelium. So I'm assuming we know what we're talking about, but you see the hyphae in the background of this image. So what is actually the behavior of these hyphae, of these combined hyphae that form the mycelium together? I think that starts with a little kind of ecosystemic overview. So it's the collection of water, no? The redistribution of nutrients. There's communication. There is providing the food and the medicine. The material side of it. It's the biggest carbon sink on the world, on land, that is. Its role as transforming dead matter into energy. The regeneration of the soil. How it protects against erosion, and how it's the collective memory of the whole fungal organism. So here, I thought it would be interesting to make a step, how to translate this behavior into human collaboration. So it's playful, but it's possible to do it. That is to collaborate, to be communicating with each other. It means resilience, improvisation, and flexibility, so that when we also realize a project or collaboration is not working, we know that it's also okay to end things. The feeding, I mean, for me in all my projects, food always play a really big role, and it's in the end what binds us together. No, we all eat. To be sensorial, I think, in the context of exhibition making, for instance, to not, and also the instance with the example with the book, know that we are not just thinking in terms of one way of understanding the world, but using all of our senses in that, and making it therefore also much more inclusive for people who have other senses that are less developed, or that are not non-existent or not working. Then the regeneration and reparation, I think particularly in thinking about colonial histories, the idea of reparation is very important. Mutuality and symbiosis. So for your work to be mutually beneficial, decentralization, which is, essentially the opposite of capitalism, where capital or resources accumulate in one place. The issue of being non-binary, and I don't just mean that in terms of your gender identity, but in ways of thinking and understanding that there is actually hardly ever an actual opposite, but everything exists on a spectrum, that we have to change, and kind of constantly. So understanding that the world is not static, and that means that we can also not static. So it's not that when we think we've found a solution that we can sit back and relax, but the world is always changing. So as people, we should also always be changing. And remembering the importance of your ancestors. What that might look like in terms of doing projects is to remember that you are not the first one to organize a protest or to organize a festival, and that also means that you don't have to invent the wheel yourself. No, so there is teachings from other projects and other people that came before you that you can learn from. So that's like a very loose translation from an ecosystemic function of mycelium to how that applies, or how that could apply in our projects and ways of working. So to pick out how to organize like mycelium, the teaching that's connected to this question is the idea of building relationships of solidarity and exchange across disciplines and borders. What does that look like in practice, in reality? So in 2012, as Danny mentioned, I set up this alliance called the Green Art Lab Alliance. We're actually now 80 organizations, because also partners from the United States and Canada joined. We're a knowledge alliance, so that means there is what circulates between all of our partners is not money, but practically any other non-monetary resource, which can take all kinds of forms. And the legal entity that sits behind the alliance is called Green Art Lab Alliance Support, GALAS. We decided that was going to be a separate entity, because we realized that if they're together, then the board would be liable for everything that happens within the alliance. And because a lot of the actions that we do are quite or sometimes quite activist, or we have partners that are situated in dictatorial regimes, it would be smarter to separate the two. And so I'll be sharing like a lot of our lessons learned in that, in how to be very strategic, how you organize yourself, well, like mycelium, but that also means how you protect yourself. This is just a very small overview of some of our partners in the world. Maybe you know a couple, maybe you know a lot of them. They're all very different. Some organizations are quite small, very like more like collectives. Others are big institutions. What they have in common, though, is that they all operate at this intersection of art and ecology. So they're arts organizations, essentially, but they engage with environmental issues in various ways, whether that's looking at material research, whether that's in a more activistic way, whether that's a farm, that is also a residency program, looking at permaculture or all sorts. So just to pick out a few, Jatiwangi Art Factory is in Indonesia, Fundación Mar Adentro in Chile, LAM in Mongolia, Somogors in Switzerland, Quinta das Relvas in Portugal, Teoretica in Costa Rica, Silo in Brazil, Big Trees in Bangkok. Helen mentioned Museo del Hongo in Chile, Platoedro in Colombia, Carlos Chapal in India, HIAP in Finland, Colectivo Amasijo in Mexico. Some of them are in very rural contexts or in forests even. Others are really in cities. So it's been really interesting understanding, how such a diverse group of 80 organizations, all trying to do similar things, can actually support each other, and how important it is to support each other and form a movement in a sector rather than being in competition with each other, which is something that we kind of more often see in the world, in the arts, in academia, in lots of places. So it started with kind of understanding what are the different forms of collaboration that are possible, and forms of self-organization. So I already explained a little bit about like the ecosystemic function of that, looking at the behavior of mycelium. I mentioned briefly the legal side of it, so I'll go deeper into that later. The issue of language and how actually writing a manifesto can be really helpful to understand how everyone, to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Then the development and the usage of platforms and resources. I already mentioned, databases as a form, as redistributing knowledge and crowdsourcing knowledge and information. And also how you shape or how you design your networks, your mutual aid networks. So to start with, these different also forms or legal forms that it can take, it's been very interesting to see how, also the possibilities are changing in terms of what legal forms are available, from foundations and nonprofits to collectives, networks or alliances. Maybe you are familiar with DAOs, that are decentralized autonomous organizations. I have a very interesting book here, if you're interested in that, called Radical Friends, which focuses on decentralized autonomous organizations in the arts. DAOs are ways of doing also collective or organizing collective decision-making project, decision-making processes of decision-making in a collective way, connected also to blockchain. There is, of course, co-ops, communes. There's many very interesting forms that I think, is worthwhile checking out for yourself. What is, what works for you? In our case, we combined the alliance and had the foundation separate from that for the reasons that I just explained. But it's very interesting this is definitely also an area of my interest. And then we made an overview of what would be then the 6 steps of creating this self-organized community. This is not, of course, like a kind of total truth. I'm sure there's more. I'm just sharing kind of what worked for us and what might be helpful for you. So I would start with the necessity of spending time together, able to grow and to develop your community. It's very important that your community is based, your self-organizing community is based on values that you share. So to have something value-based rather than anything else that you can think of. Especially now with us working with 80 different organizations, to have smaller working groups. You cannot make decisions or not even have meetings with 80 organizations together. But how do you organize smaller groups based on interests and necessities that are more specific? We do that in the form of working groups that I will tell you a little bit more about too. What is your mechanism to report back, as a working group to the bigger group without that just being, again, very long meetings, because we tend to not have very long meetings, but we do cook and, spend time together in an informal way, in the form of gala fests that I will say a little bit more about too. And as I mentioned before, it's really helpful to have a collective document of shared values. So to understand, not to have a final idea, like a static thing of this is what it is, but to have an evolving document where you can indicate where everyone is on that spectrum of shared values, including your communal obligations and the custodians of that. So talking of shared values, for us, this was an image that was really helpful to understand what our shared values were, because, particularly, back in the early 2000s, when we were still talking about climate change a lot, to understand that was only the tip of the iceberg. So how that is connected to all these other issues, from extractivism to gender inequality and colonialism, so that we could not talk about one thing without talking about the others. I think that was particularly a very important realization working across continents, where the discourse in Europe was very focused on climate change and climate science, on carbon, measuring and reducing carbon emissions, while as to have a more holistic understanding of that topic, it was very important to connect that with the topic of colonialism, for instance, or extractivism, which made the conversations much more inclusive and much more real, and understanding also what historically these entanglements have looked like in the world, and not just historically, but also still today, obviously. I'll not read the whole manifesto. It's quite long. But yeah, I invite you to look it up online. It's something that we update with every Gala Fest that we organize. So that's when we come together in person. And then we follow up just with like a Google Doc where we have then a smaller working group continuing to work on that text. And those working groups, people from different organizations and therefore also from different contexts and from different countries sit in that group. The smaller working groups, these are some of our big themes that we work on. So I mentioned we have the Gala Fests that are more like in person when we meet, and then those smaller working groups, they happen online. And important topics are energy, so really looking at how to emancipate ourselves from fossil fuel industries. I mentioned food and soil. What is the role of food in the projects that we do? How do we use it as a form to communicate, but also to care? Materials, I'll speak a little bit about the Future Materials Bank and all the improvements and changes that we can make in the materials that we use in our practice. Water, very obvious one, I would think. The trash, basura, waste management, recycling, our carbon footprints, as well as our digital footprints. Carbon footprint has been a conversation for a long time, digital footprint less so. So that means, sharing information, knowledge about also which data centers are more sustainable than others. Well, there's a lot of interesting innovations happening there. And what I mean with financial services is actually understanding where funding comes from. So making sure you are not funded by the IDF, let's say, or by companies that still have major investments in fossil fuel industries, in arms, in extractive industries. So what does that process of emancipation from that type of funding look like? And then lastly, mobility, which is still a lot, very much connected to the topic of flying or non-flying. Then with the Gala Fests, I'm just looking quickly at the time. With the Gala Fests, this happens annually. It's to kind of celebrate also the importance of meeting in person. It's great that we can now still be together, even though I'm on the other side of the world, and we can talk and we can exchange, but we believe it still doesn't really replace the importance of being together in person and what a difference that also makes. So every year a different host organization, different Gala partner organization acts as the host for the Gala Fest. It's very nice how there is already like a long list of partners saying like, oh, I want to host next year. Oh no, I want to host next year. It means that the partners are welcome to come and stay with you. We often camp. Again, it's very self-organized. We make a program together and we think about what kind of, again, non-monetary form of support we can offer the host organization. So In this case, it was with Polinaria, one of our partners in Italy, which is a amazing residency program about art and ecology, but also organic farm with grapes and olives. So we went when it was the time for the grape harvest, and besides having our workshops, our general assembly, our updating of the manifesto, we were also picking grapes and yeah, cooking together and getting to know each other in informal ways, because I think essentially that's where a lot of the trust is built, and where, you know, when many of us are also doing activist work and yeah, sometimes are operating in well, dangerous climates or yeah, regimes, it's very important that you really know that you can trust each other and can support each other with whatever it might be. You know, you might need letters of support, you might need someone's phone number, you might need visibility and a journalist from a specific country to write something about you. And so when that trust is there, it starts to be very easy to exchange these types of resources. And this was another example of our Gala Fest hosted by Fundación Mar Adentro that I mentioned before in Chile. You see here also Juan of Museo del Hongo. And Fundación Mar Adentro, they are in the south of Chile, and they're also the custodians, the stewards of a conservation forest, have a residency program in the forest. And what's quite interesting is that they understand conservation not as a way to like protect the forest by, you know, not letting things or people in, maybe just scientists, but actually by inviting artists and other people to engage with the place and to learn about the place, and by generating knowledge about the ecosystems, about the quality of the water, etc. But that's actually like a stronger way of protecting it. So it's yeah, it's always moments of a lot of learning and yeah, making strong connections. Then lastly, because I feel like we're running out of time, is I mentioned already a couple of times before the topic of materials, how we have a working group of materials, on how I'm very interested in databases. In 2020, I started something called the Future Materials Bank whilst I was working at one of our partner organizations, the Jan van Eyck Academy. Basically seeing, you know, that there was such a growing interest in artists wanting to, I don't know, communicate about the Anthropocene, or to make work about climate, or all sorts of environment, you know, topics related with the environment, while still using, I don't know, resin or materials that, or I don't know, acrylic paints. So there was a bit of a dichotomy in the message and the material. And not because they were bad artists, but because, you know, there was also less, well, if the information was not always so readily available or transparent, what actually a sustainable material is. No, so the idea was to start a platform, a database, to have crowdsourced information about these sustainable materials. So that could be non-toxic materials, biodegradable materials, looking at pigments, dyes, glues, polymers, resins, all sorts, and like a real invitation for artists to upload their project and share their recipes and share their information, not only to display let's say, but also to allow for people to have, potentially a relationship with the maker, and also much more of a relationship with the material when you understand what is the process of, how it came into the world. It's very different if you grow a material than if you buy a material in the shop. It's about spending time with that material. It was a great hit, let's say, because I mean, in the sense that it resonated with a lot of people. There is now almost 500 materials on there. There is a fellowship that Jan van Eyck offers. There is tutorials, little videos included, how you can make certain materials. And yeah, I just want to invite everyone to have a little browse. I don't know if you have a material at home that you think, oh, I drink a lot of coffee. What can I do with my coffee grinds? Or your eggshells, or making mushroom pigments. There's a lot on there. And I think it's very important. Well, a very important idea behind it was to show that a conversation about, a paradigm shift in terms of what we change in our behaviors in these times is not only about what we can't do. No, it's not just about, oh, we can't fly, we can't eat meat, we can't do this and we can't do that. It's also about, wait a minute, this change is going to make things more beautiful, because these are materials that are more interesting, they're more complex, they might have a spirit, they have a story, like they're materials that we can have a relationship with. So to also change that idea of it just being negative, to, wait a minute, this is actually also more beautiful and more interesting. And of course, I mean, mycelium is definitely a hit on the Future Materials Bank. I think there is now, I don't know, maybe almost 30 projects in there using mycelium as a material, from lamps to a coffin made of mycelium, all different types of substrates that people are using. And so again, you don't have to invent the wheel, but rather let's make this process about sharing information and knowledge, as does the mycelium. And then lastly, there is a offline part of the Future Materials Bank 2. This is already an older picture. It has grown a lot. So this offline material library can be found at the Jan van Eyck Academy, because, like I said, we also do like to touch and smell and sometimes taste. I do have a few more slides, but I think it's 10 now, so maybe I'll leave it here and we have a little bit more time to talk. And then if needed, I can also share those last things, because they were more related to the cards and like some questions, exercises that I could share. But maybe I'll stop here for the moment and see how you feel about the
Okay,
next steps.
thanks a lot,